He had closed million-dollar deals, stood in boardrooms commanding respect, and driven cars worth more than most people's homes. But that day, as he slid into the back seat of his luxury sedan, he heard a voice, small, firm, and unshakably bold. "Shut up." A black little girl, no more than 10, stared at him with eyes that carried storms. She didn't flinch, didn't smile. Why would a child speak to him like that? The answer would change everything he thought he knew about himself. Jonathan Mercer was the kind of man people noticed. At 42, he was the youngest CEO in his industry, a name in the financial world that carried weight. His days were meticulously planned, his time worth thousands of dollars an hour. That morning had been routine. Early workout, power breakfast, back-to-back meetings, the usual. As his driver pulled up outside his downtown office, Jonathan slid into the back seat, already scrolling through his phone, checking market updates. That's when he noticed they weren't alone. Next to him sat a small, dark-skinned girl wearing a faded pink hoodie. Her hair was in 2 messy braids, and her sneakers looked like they'd been through 100 playgrounds. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't even curious about the man sitting beside her. Before Jonathan could say anything, she raised her hand slightly, palm out, and said it. "Shut up." Jonathan froze. No one spoke to him that way, not in years. Certainly not a child. His driver glanced in the mirror but didn't say a word. Jonathan opened his mouth to ask who she was, why she was here. But something in her gaze made him stop. Her eyes were locked onto his, unblinking, and then he heard it. The faintest sound, not from her, but from outside. Somewhere in the street, traffic is behind them. Jonathan leaned forward, confused. "What's going on?" he asked the driver. But the little girl shook her head slowly. And for the first time in years, Jonathan Mercer, the man who always had answers, had no idea what was about to happen. The car pulled away from the curb, but Jonathan could still feel the weight of the girl's stare. He tried again. "Who are you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the tinted window, her small hand tightening around the strap of a worn canvas backpack. Jonathan glanced at his driver. "David, what is this? Why is she—" "Sir," David interrupted, his voice unusually tense. "I think you should just listen." Jonathan frowned, irritation building. But before he could press further, the girl whispered, almost too softly to hear, "They're following us." He turned his head sharply. Behind them, through the rear window, Jonathan spotted a dark SUV weaving through traffic. It stayed just far enough back to be inconspicuous, but close enough that every time they changed lanes, it did too. Jonathan's mind raced. "What do you mean they're following us? Who's they?" The girl didn't answer. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, crumpled notebook. On the first page was a photograph, old, creased, with worn edges. It showed a man Jonathan didn't recognize, but the man was standing beside a much younger Jonathan, smiling. Jonathan felt a chill. He had no memory of the photo being taken. "They took my dad," the girl finally said, her voice steady despite the quiver in her hands. "And they'll come for you next if you don't stop talking." Jonathan's pulse quickened. "What does that mean? Who are these people?" She glanced at the SUV again. "The ones who pay for silence. My dad worked for your company. He found something. Something about the money. Then he disappeared." Jonathan's stomach dropped. He knew about internal corruption rumors. But they were just whispers in the industry, things he thought he had under control. The girl's eyes met his again. "You talk too much," she said quietly. "That's why I told you to shut up. If they hear you, they'll know you know." Outside, the SUV drew closer. Jonathan felt trapped between disbelief and an instinctive urge to protect this child. "David," he said sharply, "get us off the main road." but the driver's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Sir, they're already too close." The SUV surged forward, closing the gap. Jonathan's heart pounded. He had been in high-stakes negotiations, stared down ruthless competitors, but this was different. This was survival. The girl leaned forward. "When we turn onto the next street, Duck." Jonathan stared at her. "What are you? Just do it!" she snapped. The car veered sharply left. Tires screeched. Jonathan dropped down onto the seat, pulling the girl with him. A sharp crack split the air. Gunfire. Glass shattered, the back window exploding in a spray of shards. David swerved violently, throwing both of them against the door. "Hold on!" the driver yelled. Jonathan's mind flashed with images. The photo, the whispers about corruption, the girl's unwavering stare. This wasn't random. This was connected to him. As they sped through side streets, the girl pressed something into his hand, a flash drive, small and cold. "My dad told me to give this to the man in the picture if anything happened," she said. "That's you." Jonathan's chest tightened. "What's on it?" She looked away. "The truth. Enough to take them down." The SUV was gone now, but Jonathan knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. They finally pulled into the underground garage of Jonathan's penthouse. The car stopped, but Jonathan didn't move for a moment. His hand still gripped the flash drive like a lifeline. He looked at the girl. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said simply. Jonathan nodded slowly. "You're staying here tonight." For a man who had built his life on control, this day had been chaos. But in the middle of it, a little girl had handed him something far more valuable than any business deal: the truth. He had choices now: pretend this never happened, or face what was on that flash drive and risk everything. Jonathan knew what he had to do. Maya's father had trusted him once, long ago. Now his daughter was trusting him with the same mission: to expose the ones who destroyed lives for profit. As he plugged the flash drive into his laptop, he glanced at Maya, who was curled up on the couch, still clutching her backpack. The files began to open. Names, transactions, dates, evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful people in the city. Jonathan exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about his reputation anymore. It was about justice. How far would he go to protect a child and destroy the empire of lies he had unknowingly helped build?